There isn't an option for not sure, but we'll note that mentally. Thank you, Mayor. Right, we will go to item 12, the Hauraki Gulf Tikapa Moana Marine Protection Bill. Councillor Deputy Mayor?
Yeah, I potentially may...
Or just your mic, sorry.
I potentially may have a conflict, and when in doubt, I think I might step away for this item.
Thank you. And Councillor Lee, I don't know, I know you don't have a conflict.
I'll declare an interest.
Yeah, interest.
I'll declare an interest. I have helped prepare a submission for this as the chair of the Friends of the Hauraki Gulf, and we also have an application for a marine reserve currently in front of the Department of Conservation. Been through public consultation, currently last 2 years sitting in somebody's desk in the department. So I'll declare that interest.
Kia ora, Councillor Lee, thank you for that.
Right. And Chair, sorry, it's Chris Fetchy here. For the avoidance of doubt, for those of us who actually sit on the Hauraki Gulf Forum, we should perhaps put that up as well.
Kia ora, thank you, Councillor. I don't believe sitting on another, that's part of your role, so I wouldn't say, but I think, yeah, foreshadowing it is a good idea, but I wouldn't perceive that you would have a conflict by doing a job on behalf of the council in that space, but thank you for that. Right, we have Dave and Olivia. Would you like to lead off with your presentation? Thank you.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Today we are coming to talk to you about this new bill that's been finally delivered for comment from around the country. So we've got an opportunity to look at our draft submission for the council and give you the opportunity to obviously give us some feedback on that to us. I just wanted to note that technically the submission close time was last night. We put a draft down as a placeholder with clear instructions that we'll be coming back with a final position from the council in due course. So just wanted to note that. So this, and I should just introduce myself, Dave Allen, Manager Natural Environment Strategy, and with me is Olivia Blanchard, Natural Environment Strategy Senior Analyst. Kia ora. So basically this bill, there's been quite a long gestation period to this coming along. I guess if you go back 9 years to the sea change process, one of the work streams in that was how we were going to look after marine protection in the Hauraki Gulf. And so eventually we've got through a number of key steps, with firstly the sea change plan being finished by this independent stakeholder working group and getting published in April 2017, and then obviously the government's response to the sea change plan was published in June 21. And that basically carried through a lot of the marine protection proposals that the stakeholder working group had been evaluating in earlier years, and subsequently, as of 31st of August this year, they've now crafted a bill which basically sets out the 19 new protection areas that are proposed to be advanced across the Hauraki Gulf. I'll just quickly note that, of course, this is in the coastal marine area of both the Auckland region as well as the Waikato region. And I guess one of the qualifications we put in our submission was the fact that we're sort of mainly commenting on behalf of Auckland, but that in general we would support the intent across the Gulf. So I just wanted to just note that. And as I mentioned, we are on a bit of a tight time frame, that even though Parliament has dissolved and the Select Committee is not going to be hearing this for a while, we do need to probably get this through the Council and also the delegated authorisers and through to the Environment Select Committee very shortly. So in general, as I said, there's 19 areas proposed for some level of protection. Basically, there are options there for extensions of existing marine reserves, and for the Auckland coastal area that relates to the reserve at Goat Island. There's also 5 new seafloor protection areas that are proposed, which are there in green on the screen. And then there's also 12 new high protection areas that are there in yellow. I won't go into the details of the areas at this point in time, but just to note that this has been kind of pretty well canvassed over the last few years in terms of those areas. So basically and there's been a number of scientific evaluations of the biodiversity values in these particular areas. So there's been quite a lot of modelling done on some of the biogenic habitat within these areas and the values associated with protection in these areas. One of the things that the bill does, though, is that it does set up a new dual permitting regime to authorise what is termed prohibited activities in the new protected areas proposed. So if you wanted to do a range of activities which might be inconsistent with the expectations of these high protection or C4 protection areas, you would need a consent through the resource management process, which I've perhaps loosely just referred to as RMA in that slide, but obviously whatever the resource management law is called. And then the additional step now is that they're looking at a DOC permit being considered for any applications that are being made. And I guess that sort of, in our mind, just creates a few potential issues, and I'll sort of get onto that in due course. So generally the submission that we've drafted up supports marine protection in the Gulf, and we note that this will increase the protected areas from about 6.7% to 18%. There is a whole lot of other variety of protection type measures in the Gulf, so that number is not necessarily the full extent of some other sorts of protection, but mainly for different purposes, for fisheries management reasons, for example. And I guess, as I've said, there's three different particular elements to the protection that's actually covered off in the bill, recognising the two extensions to existing marine reserves, and then of course the tools that are proposed for HPAs, high protection areas, and C4 protection areas, or SPAs. One of the concerns staff have identified is that there is a potential overreach in terms of how prohibition of activities might be set out in the bill, and that there may be a bit of a need just to rationalise the number of approvals that might be sought to do activities within an area deemed of high significance. And I think we've come up with a couple of ways to address that in the next couple of slides, but I wanted to just also highlight that one of the clauses in the bill actually sets up an exemption regime for certain activities that will need to be undertaken in certain circumstances. So, for example, I've got the actions under the Biosecurity Act, the Resource Management Marine Pollution Regulations, stormwater discharges when it's a permitted activity, DOC activities and Defence Force activities, and in the case of emergencies. And also the first bullet point I've just got up there is for granted resource consents until they expire, which is the current language in the bill, and that potentially creates some issues where replacement consents are required for some of the major infrastructure activities that Watercare have identified in the case of some of the sewage discharge sites up north. So, but more broadly, there's support for the bill in terms of what it is trying to achieve, and it's really about some of the detail about how best to actually accomplish the outcomes in the bill. Just to highlight, the dual permitting approach is potentially inefficient and cumbersome for all the parties involved with sort of getting access to these areas if there's a legitimate reason to do so. This is not taking away from the fact that if an activity which is deemed prohibited is actually inappropriate, well, it shouldn't be authorised. I guess the question is whether or not some of these activities might be just aligned with resource management legislation, putting in place prohibited activities under resource management legislation as opposed to prohibited activities under the new bill, which is sort of a bit of a double up. One terminology thing I'll just note is that prohibited under resource management legislation means that no consents can be applied for. Prohibited in the context of this new bill means that you actually can still apply for a permit. And in resource management legislation terminology, you probably call that non-complying, where there's still an ability to apply for an authorisation. So there's just a bit of terminology issues there. But also we think that there might just be some administrative efficiency achieved without negating the desire of what we're trying to achieve from a biodiversity protection point of view. One way to do that is to start to align some of the activities that you manage under your regional planning provisions better with what is actually sought to be achieved through this bill. And then another option is that you know, start to use some of the existing tools that are actually in resource management legislation, whether it's through a national planning framework that's proposed through the new resource management legislation, or through some of the other tools that are available under resource management legislation, natural environment standards, and also the coastal policy statement. I did mention some of the infrastructure concerns that particularly related to Watercare's interests in their discharge activities near the Kowau Island area and Tiritiri Maitangi. So there's an issue there as to whether or not we should be looking to allow for those discharges, which basically service the Rodney area in terms of some of the potential for sewage discharge, treated sewage discharge. And the other thing we've just noted is that in the case of places like Kowau, there's lots of jetties and wharfs and what have you, and so basically the question would be, you're potentially creating a lot of additional authorisation required for those kinds of activities. And one suggestion we have is that you might want to look at introducing a setback of 150 metres from the shoreline, which would basically mean that some of those activities would only be under the Resource Management Act would be considered, or that's how you would assess them. So that's an option. It's not something, you know, it's just that we're just sort of saying, hey, have you really thought this through? And basically to central government, and so basically whether or not the biodiversity objective would be compromised or not, and hopefully not, but just a question we wanted to put to them. And that's really the kind of two key areas that we wanted to highlight in terms of some of the potential additional authorisation required. We did point out in the bill, in the submission, that there will be obviously a need to ensure that there's ongoing monitoring to ensure effectiveness assessments of the protected areas and how we're actually meeting some of the biodiversity outcomes expected. And because these are spatial areas that will need some enforcement, there's going to have to be an increased public awareness as to where these areas are, and so that they're appropriately policed or self-policed. That cost will of course fall on the Department of Conservation as supported by a Maritime Unit of Police and or Ministry of Fisheries and potentially Ministry of Transport. When you think about all the different agencies involved, and potentially there could be a role for councils in looking at illegal resource management activities that may happen. And I think lastly, the bill does talk about some of the aspects of Maori involvement in how they exercise kaitiakitanga and the high protection areas in particular, and how customary fishing is permitted as a result of ongoing treaty rights. And so there's just a need there for Maori to be involved with central government staff and DOC as to how that might take place in terms of just, you know, if there are particular issues that might need just a bit of questioning as to whether it would disrupt the intent of the biodiversity protection for a particular area. So, and I think that was all I had. I think just some additional things that I wanted to just highlight were that there's just some sort of detailed things like there's no actual fees set out for any permitting regime in the bill, so how is this going to be cost recovered? And if it is a cost recovery regime, how is DOC going to actually set those application fees? Because if they're prohibitive, then you might have some more illegal activity. So how do you make it sensible and you know, those sorts of comments. And I guess the only other thing I wanted to just sort of note is that there's a lot of instruments in the resource management law that enable us to set biodiversity outcomes and objectives, and I think there's going to be a need for us over time to actually align some of our, and be clearer in our biodiversity outcomes for the marine environment, and actually take into account the particular needs of localised areas that are set up in these particular high protection areas or seafloor protection areas. And just also just to acknowledge the Northwest Waiheke Marine Reserve application, we did note in the submission that there is this opportunity in terms of the timeline for consideration of this bill being progressed through the House to consider how the Northwest Waiheke Friends of the Gulf application is considered at that time. So it just seems to me to be timely to sort of consider those things at the same time. So that's probably it for me.
Kia ora, Dave. Thank you, and Olivia and the team for all the work on this and the work very, very long term over time. I know that I think Councillor Ferry, you said you'd like to move this, and I've got a question from Mayor Brown. You wanted a second, Councillor Leone.
Thanks for that. You had a map up there showing those little areas for the fish. I don't know if you can find that again up there. And it sort of runs a little bit with the next event after this about bottom trawling as well. Now, I'm in great favour of anything that protects the Gulf. But, I mean, if I'm out there in my boat, how the hell do I know that I'm not accidentally fishing in 3 or 7A, for instance? I mean, it looks good on a map there, and that one's yellow. And I mean, the water's not yellow when I'm out there, so I mean, and I don't get out to break the law, but my navigation's not that accurate that I might have wandered into 7A and got a fish with a bit of luck, although my fishing's pretty crap, so I'll probably, nevertheless, I'd like to have a crack at it. So how do I know? And then in the next one, I don't know if it's the next one here, but I've got a picture of a map here that I had that came out of it. I asked some questions, and I'll pass it round for you. I've got the map here. I had to get it blamped to A3 because in the A4 one I couldn't see anything at all. I have the map in front of me here, and I've written at the bottom, only a bureaucrat could have come up with this. Even looking at the map and with the guide underneath here, I can't tell where I can fish or bottom trawl, even if I knew how to bottom trawl. It's frickin' mad. You know, how do people know that they've got these things? How do they come up with a shape like that? And that bit there with the yellow around it, and it looks like a sort of a bit that's going to have a bit of a cartoon written inside it, like madness or something. I'm not even sure that's where I'm not allowed to fish or allowed to fish. And how the hell I'd be able to find out whether I was in that shape at the time or not, I don't know. So has anyone ever asked somebody or other how, because when you go, they all watch TV so much when you watch the racing of those yachts around there, and you see that it's all got marked out and they're inside the area. It isn't actually like that when you go out and have a look. You know, it just looks like water to me, and so.
Well, that, as mayor,
and I've just been telling you about the hazards of bureaucrats. Well, shit, here's one. Have a look at this. And for you, if you want to look after your Maori interests out there in your canoe, mate, you haven't got a bloody chance. So I'll pass this round. I defy you to tell me whether I can fish in Rangitoto or not.
So would
It's
you
just
like me
sheer
to...
bloody madness.
First of all, because that question took a little while, we need to do an extension of time. Councillor Turner moved, Councillor Leone second. All those in favour?
I'm a time hazard now as well.
Yeah. I think, didn't you know part of the mayor's job is to go and paint the lines every morning on the...
I did paint them and they bloody well moved in the last storm, I'm sorry.
So Dave is going to try his best to answer your question. Dave.
Yeah, look, even putting aside, you know, one's fishing abilities, I think that, you know, there is a real issue there, and I think, you know, I've been involved in this sort of type of discussion for many years, and there is, I mean, the other comment to make is that this is, some of these areas have been developed by the stakeholder working group in terms of where those biogenic habitats are. And so basically it then has been checked scientifically to say that these are the right areas. In terms of actually how you would actually identify this, there's an expectation, I suppose, that, well, the charts, marine charts will be updated, and so you'll actually see on a chart where these areas are. Those boundaries will be depicted there. So your GPS plotter will be automatically updated. For the industry, for the ones that not, because we're not talking about the industry here, in terms of the trawl area, that's for the next presentation, but they have pretty sophisticated GPS plotters with these areas actually depicted, and they can actually have alarms going off in their wheelhouse as to when they sort of get close to these particular exclusion areas. And it does look kind of confusing when you look at it on 1A3, but some of these, this is, to be honest, I mean, this is just one layer of lines. You know, there's plenty of other lines that we're not presenting to you here that relate to some of the fisheries management controls that have been existing around for quite some time, for some time, you know, decades. But I guess the other point is that there is a drive from the community and interest in general to see these areas set aside, and we just need to make sure we actually, and also central government need to make sure they have the right people and resources out there to actually ensure these areas are enforced and the public are aware of them.
Okay, well, I get that, but I mean, that picture that is going around is the same size as the screen on my GPS, and I'm just reading it there and I can't separate what I'm allowed to do even there with it in front of me, and I'm not sure if mine comes with stars and screens on it as well as that, but you would have thought they could have made it a bit simpler to me, you know, and these have got right angles on them, you know, that picture up there. And I have never seen anything in nature that has as a neat rectangle. They tend to be odd shapes. And so there's kind of a bureaucratic has interfered with common sense here. What is the disease that we're fixing in Wellington? I'll stop now, but you can see what I mean.
I think it's a good point, and I think probably, you know, even part of the submission, Mayor, maybe we could put, you know, as this rolls out, we will need some clear methodology of understanding for the, I was going to say the person on the street, but they're clearly not on the street when they're in the water, but the person on the water, you know, we know the commercial sector will be very clear and have sophisticated, but I think if we could put in the submission that this needs to be...
This is not sensible. This is what we would put in there. The aims are wonderful, but I'm absolutely sure that the fish don't know that they're in a rectangle. Okay.
That's very true. And look, we have got a paragraph to that effect in there already. I guess the other thing is that these areas were checked against sort of marine protection design standards as well, which have been developed nationally. So they consider things like whether or not something should be a round reserve versus a square one, things like that, depending on the bathymetry that you're looking at and what features that you're actually looking to protect in particular areas. So there's a number of considerations, but I take the point, and it's something we've raised pretty consistently.
Thank you, Mayor. Councillor Watson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. In fact, that map the Mayor had makes it a lot clearer than looking at that. And I've got a very specific question, David. I don't know if you'll be able to answer it or not, but it goes to, I think it's the area 11A, which is just the tip of Whangaproa Peninsula. So I can see the deep water protection area, but the seafloor protection area. So that basically takes out kind of trawling, doesn't it? That's the main purpose of that one.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so I can see that, but with Tiritiri Matangi there's then one of the high protection areas that I guess prohibit any sort of fishing on the western side of Tiritiri. Is that correct? Your reading of the map there?
So the seafloor protection area prohibits not only trawling, it's dredging, Dana seining as well.
Yep.
And so in terms of the extent of the area that is in the seafloor protection area, it's the area to the north across the Whangaproa Peninsula, whereas the small area to the south of Tiritiri is the high protection area.
Yes, so I guess the question that comes from that, and it may apply to some, fine with with the seafloor protection area, and this is a feedback that's come certainly through with the fishing clubs and whatnot, is for your ordinary kind of boatie, that's a popular area, and the concern is that people will be pushed out into other areas that are unsafe or beyond the capabilities of their craft. What is the ability therefore through this process, people have had the opportunity, I guess, to submit on this, and I'm not sure what the uptake on that was. But I guess my question out of all this is, to what extent is that kind of safety concern maybe a consideration in some of these areas where a lot of people go in limited craft and their options aren't that great, and that certainly applies to the Tiriti Channel.
So that issue, Councillor Watson, has been raised previously in the design of some of these areas, and it's a frequent concern with any of these protection areas put up about how you're going to displace particular fishing effort, and safety in small craft in particular is a constant issue in some of the nearshore environments. So I think through the select committee process they'll be considering that and basically making an adjustment that they feel is appropriate. Now, when National were in the first reading of the bill, National said there may be some tweaks that are required for some of the boundaries, whether that's because of where the biogenic habitat is that's important, or whether it's considering other things like safety. We're yet to see how the select committee goes on that, but we are dependent on submission points on that issue.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. There are no more quick, Councillor Darby.
Just a quick one, Dave. There are other parties that have, interests in common with the public, and maybe that's from the group, and I didn't catch the name, councillor, that you're working with, or Environmental Defence Society. Environmental Defence Society's made a very comprehensive submission. So you've scanned those other they're public interest bodies, really,
Yes.
And they are highly respected bodies like EDS. You've scanned their drafts